Welcome to the video. Today I'm going to be talking about essay writing as a way to continue to write my dissertation and also get a video out of it. For some background, I'm currently studying for a master's in AI ethics at the University of Cambridge. That's something that I do part-time, and then I still work full-time as a software engineer. For my course, I have to write 4 5,000-word essays, which is one every term. And then at the very end, I have to write a 15,000-word dissertation, which is what I'm currently working on. I have a STEM background and I did a computer science undergrad. And so pretty much all my academic assessment up until I started the master's was done via practical assessments, vivas, which are oral exams, and then sitting exams, but not really exams that were written. All this to say that over the course of my adult life, I've actually done very little long-form writing, other than the occasional blog post for work or for my personal blog, but really nothing that is particularly academic and nothing that I've had to do a huge amount of research and structure and preparation for. And so when I started the master's, that was something that I had to learn how to do very quickly. My course is interdisciplinary, so pretty much all my essays kind of take a slightly different form, so they're not really tied into any specific form of writing. And so I'm going to be talking about essay writing in a more general sense of collecting and synthesizing and writing information as opposed to writing for any specific discipline. Being the tech bro that I am, I have a bunch of digital tools and a whole little process for how I do my writing. But I do try to keep it fairly lightweight because alongside with working full-time, I don't really have a huge amount of time to study, so I try to keep it quite efficient. So I have 3 main tools that I use. One is Readwise, which is what I use for reading and highlighting things. The second thing is Roam, which I use for kind of synthesizing things, collecting information, and then doing most of the writing process. And then I use Google Docs for the very final bits of writing and then actually sending off the essay. I'll link to Readwise and Roam down below if anyone is interested. I think of the writing process as being broken down roughly into 3 stages. So collecting information, synthesizing information, and then actually doing the writing. So I'm going to be talking about what those 3 stages look like for me. Coming into an essay, you kind of have some idea about what you're writing about, but you may not have this huge idea around what you're writing. So the very first thing to do is decide the topic and find a bunch of things to read about that topic. For me, this usually means going onto Google Scholar and basically looking up the keywords for what I need to look at, and then looking at things that have been cited a lot, or anything that has a title or an abstract, which seems pretty relevant to what I want to look at. For a 5,000-word essay, I usually read around 30 papers or so, and a couple of books. I don't usually have an argument planned out when I start writing an essay, as I like to read around and kind of see what the field is saying. So I usually have a topic or so in mind, but I don't necessarily have the whole argument. For the essays on my course, the questions are often quite vague. Sometimes they're just like, pick a topic and write about it. So they're not often very directed. And that's quite nice for me because it means I get to pick what I'm writing about. But it also means that things can be quite broad. So I don't like to go in with any specific argument, but more just read around the literature and see what the literature is saying and then formulate my ideas around it. The main idea for me when I'm reading is to read everything once and to not have to come back to the paper to do a reread. So I should only be coming back to the paper to get quotes, but not to actually reread the whole thing. So while I'm reading, I tend to leave highlights and notes and all these sorts of things for myself as I do the first pass. So for example, I might highlight an entire quote like this that it'll save the whole thing to Readwise, or I'll leave notes for myself in there, either of things that I think I want to use in the essay so that I can search this up in Readwise and find all the bits that say like for essay, or I leave myself notes around what was in the paper. So for example, in this paper, there was quite a useful glossary of a bunch of terms and philosophical and tech terms, but instead of saving several pages of highlights, I've left myself a note saying, here's a glossary, so that if I want to come back to it later, I know exactly what paper to go and find definitions for certain things. I then reach the synthesizing stage, which is kind of the crucial stage around deciding the structure of the essay and what you're going to be writing. I then start to go through all the highlights to pull out relevant things for myself. So I'll clean up anything that hasn't come through that well in the highlights. So especially for older papers, sometimes with the way the OCR works and the highlighting and things on PDFs, words get missed out or line endings end up a bit strained. So I'll do all the grammar and general cleanup, but then I'll also have read through the highlights, pull out anything that I think is relevant for the essay. And I'm very open at this point, so anything that I think might be relevant comes into Roam. And I'll also take out any references that I've highlighted at the end of the paper of anything else to read, and I'll kind of continue to form a running list of other papers to read as I'm reading through the existing ones that I found. I'll also write a short summary into Roam like this, around what the paper was about, just so that I have a point of reference of if I'm ever looking for a paper and I kind of remember, oh, it was roughly about this topic, I'm able to find it again without kind of faffing around in Readwise. Now onto the main bit, the writing. At this point, I'm in one of 2 states. Either as I'm pulling things out into Roam, I start kind of forming a bit of structure and grouping things together, or I end up with a bunch of very disjointed quotes, and there's no real structure. If I have ended up with some kind of structure already, I'll just try to make sure any unfiled quotes end up somewhere. So I end up with something like this, where I've got a bunch of vague headings and things kind of grouped together, and this is enough for me to get started because I have this kind of vague structure at this point. If at this point I don't have a structure and I'm still feeling quite muddled around what the kind of arguments and things are in the paper, I'll usually go into Miro and then put some sticky notes down and try to group things together and figure out what goes together and what kind of themes are coming through in lots of the papers that I'm reading. So I like to have something like this, which is just lots and lots of frames and sticky notes and things on Miro with details. I don't like to go too granular, so I just kind of read through a lot of the quotes that I have and will basically look at themes and things and try to put that down and kind of form this structure. So at the end of this, I end up with a very vague structure, which is still a little bit disjointed sometimes, but does mean I kind of know what each of the chapters and things are going to be in the paper, which is enough for me to get started. Now that I've got a structure, I start the first draft. And the first draft is always very bad, but it basically lets you put things down onto paper. So you start seeing where things in your structure were a bit wrong and things don't flow that nicely. So I start the first draft, which often for me ends up being a bit longer than the essay needs to be. So for a 5,000 word essay, it ends up being closer to around 7,000 words or so, which I think is fine. I also have lots of bits where I end up saying, find a quote here, find the reference here, does this make sense? And I'll leave myself lots of little notes about it, because this is the first draft, so it actually doesn't really need to be full at all. But for now, I'm just trying to get the flow of the essay going and just get everything down on paper. Once I finish the first draft, I try to finish this in the evening so that I can sleep on it and come back the next day with fresh eyes. For my second draft, I'm basically aiming to get quite close to the final copy. At this point, I'm basically aiming to fill in all the to-dos that I've left myself from the day before, and also correct any grammar that I see as I go along around things that don't flow so well. Because the first draft's a little long, I also then try to cut things out. Often when you're reading, once you've read, you really want to put that reference in because you think that, okay, I've spent an hour or two reading this thing, I really want to include it somewhere. But I really try to cut stuff like that out and think about, is this helping with the argument of the essay, and does this make sense, or does this feel a bit disjointed from the sections around it? And so, reading quite critically, you end up looking at the flow of things, and you start spotting lots of bits that don't really flow so well and are a bit extra. And so you have to sharpen your ego a little bit and just remove those bits. I also then for each section will add the signposting. So at the start of each section, I'll write a little bit about what the section is going to be about, and at the end of the section, I'll then summarize what I've just said. Then having read all the sections and cleaned everything up, I'll then write the abstract and the conclusion, which I don't write until the essay is almost done because you almost sometimes don't know what the essay is about until you're writing it. At this point, I'm pretty much done with the essay and I'm getting quite close to actually being able to send it off. So then I'll take everything out of Roam and into Google Docs to do the very final bits. And those really consist of two things. It's adding any images in. Lots of my essays come with images like this, which I think are hilarious, and I'll always try to add in something a bit funny. I'll then also add all the references in and generate the bibliography. I think reference adding is quite easy, but just quite tedious. I use Zotero, but not really for any reason, just because it was the first thing that I tried and I know how to use it. And then that's got quite a good plugin that you use in the browser to scrape metadata out, and then a plugin that you put into Google Docs. Then I'll check the word count, make sure that I'm not too under or too over, and then put that into the essay, turn it into a PDF, and then it's ready to go. I hope this was helpful. When I first started my master's, I didn't necessarily have a good sense about how to write well, so I did try to read a bit about it and watch a bunch of videos and kind of see what other people's processes are, but then also do a bit of trial and error as I went along. That's the video. Bye. Why am I rehearsing how to talk? We've reached a new level, really. Interdisciplinary. Such a weird word. Why are the lights turned off? What side is this going to be on? That's probably good enough.